Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Liberia History Channel. My name is Dennis Jar, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. As a school kid in Liberia, I learned the president. That time there were 19 presidents, and I learned something like this: Joseph Jenkins Roberts, Stephen Allen, Daniel B. Warner, and throughout my lifetime, that's all I knew. I really, maybe it's me. I did not take the time to actually study the Liberian presidents. Who are these people? Where do they come from? Where they live? Were they real human beings? How did they interact with the people? And what was their administration like? All
Mhm.
these I did not learn, and I believe most of you, maybe that escaped you too, besides the few that took up the time by themselves to learn these things. So we have dedicated some time to looking at the Liberian presidents, starting from Joseph Jenkins Roberts and probably to Barclay. And we'll leave Tubman, Tubman, Doe, and the rest with
What we
modern day history, maybe. But let's start with Joseph Jenkins Roberts. And to do this, I have with me here your presenter called Famula. Some say Professor Famula, some say resident historian, some say the student of history. Call, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yes, I am definitely not a professor. I am a student of history, lifelong student. I've been studying for a while, but please, I'm not a professor. The one person that could call me professor, and it's almost like a running joke is Muhammad Salia Dukli, but other than that, just call me Call.
And according to Call, it is only permissible for Mohammed Salia Dukle to call her professor. We want to
He
welcome
started.
all our viewers from across the globe. This is the Liberia History Channel, and we're going to be dealing with, starting with President Joseph Jenkins Roberts. As you may recall, he was president twice. So we may spend a little more time on President Robert than most of the other presidents. So if you are here, share the show, invite a friend, and if you have any question, if you have anything to add, anything you remember about Joseph Jenkins Roberts, if you were fortunate enough to see maybe his dining room in the museum, or you remember where he lived, if you saw his house before, please join the conversation. Right there, if you live in Monrovia, you might have seen something concerning Joseph Jenkins Roberts. The name Joseph Jenkins Roberts has become almost like a cliche in Liberia. If you want to talk about anything old, you say since J.J. Roberts' time. I mean, this is very old. So J.J. Roberts is synonymous to the beginning of time. Welcome again to the show and call. It is my honor to welcome you. And as we go through all this, we are also, blessed to have you to share, your knowledge and what you have read to share with us. So thank you for coming again, and let's get this started.
Absolutely. So yes, as Dennis said, we are going to go through from Roberts all the way to Barclay, the second President Barclay, which is Edwin. So he served just before Tubman. The History Channel, others have come on and thoroughly discussed the other three presidents, not other three, but the other presidents that came after Barclay, which is Tubman, Talbot, Doe, Taylor, and so on. So I'm going to actually stop the series at Edwin Barclay because I think most of us don't know much about the presidents before Tubman. So we're going to focus on them.
It's important you said that, right? Because somebody was telling me, oh, this president is the worst president ever in the history of Liberia. This is the best ever in the history of Liberia. So I asked a simple question. I said, what do you know about Afri F. Rosa? He said, was that a president? I said, okay. So if you don't know all of them, don't do any comparison, please.
Right.
So we're going to
That's
start with,
pretty funny.
so,
That's
so
pretty.
Carl, give us a preview of for each of these presidents. I know what should we expect that you'll be covering.
So I'm gonna, I always like with history, I like to, take the road less traveled, go off the beaten path, talk a little bit about people's backgrounds. Who were they? I like the human aspect of history and kind of what shaped these people. How did they grow up? What were their belief systems? What was their background? Where were they born? How were they born? How were they raised? Were they born free? Were they born indigenous and then, transcended, their indigenousness through education and abandoned it and become something else? So a lot of things we're going to go through with these presidents and examine them. Did they consider themselves to be African, or did they think that being Liberian was something else? So we're going to talk about this a lot in detail. And when I use the word African, I mean, not just Black, but Native to the continent, and how do they, see themselves in the greater context of Africa? So those are, so it's going to be background, meaning upbringing and everything, philosophy, their philosophical ideology, how they viewed the country, and then, a couple of their great achievements.
Right. Anytime you study this, or you kind of even think about presidents of Liberia, especially growing up, you don't even imagine if they were actual human beings that had children, that had wives, that had family, that went out in your place there and interacted with people just like everybody else. So it's very interesting that we're going to touch on that so that we can see where these people are coming from. And then as they were president, because your life story is going to inform how you view things. It's going to inform your perspective of life and how you even govern. So it's important that we really go through that. I'm excited. I can't wait to, for the first time, learn about my presidents instead of just something on the surface. So let's begin with, these days now we call everybody comrade. So let's begin with Comrade Joseph Jenkins Roberts.
I love it. Yeah, so J.J. Roberts, Liberians affectionately call him J.J. Roberts. He was born March 15, 1809. So he was relatively young, when he emigrated to Liberia in 1829. So he died in office on February 24th, 1876. So he actually died while he was in office. Contrary to popular belief, he was born free. His mother was emancipated when she was 15 years old. And so J.J. Roberts was never a slave. So that's just to kind of bust a common misnomer about Roberts having been a freed slave. He was born free in Virginia and grew up with, relative comfort compared to others in his situation, especially when his mother married Mr. Roberts, who was not his biological father. But we'll get into that a little bit. But his mother's background is a little, shady as we dig into it. But we're gonna let's move forward.
Good, and that need to be even emphasized. I know we spoke about this before about being born free.
Right.
The history, as we studied them, we group everyone has freed slaves,
right,
or ex-slaves. But some of these people were never slaves, and you're saying Joseph Jenkins Roberts was never a slave; he was born free. So that's important.
Exactly. So I'm going to talk about his background, talk about his mother, Amelia Roberts. So Abayomi Kanga was, quoted in his book as saying that Joseph Jenkins Roberts was an octoroon, which meant he was only 1/8 African, which is inaccurate. So maybe Abayomi Kanga, 100 years ago didn't have the information that we have today. But Roberts was not an octoroon. He wasn't 1/8 African. He was a quarter African. His mother, Amelia, was half African, half European. So when I say European and African, I'm talking about ethnicity. Her parents were Americans, one of African descent and one of European descent. So she was, what they called at the time mulatto, biracial. So he has one full-blooded African grandparent, which would have been Amelia Roberts' mother.
Right.
Amelia Roberts' father was European. And there is some speculation that Amelia Roberts' father may have been Native American, but I don't know if that's true. I did read that. I haven't had that corroborated. Now, she was emancipated in 1804 at the age of 15. and almost immediately began having children at that point. So there is some speculation that, you know, she was emancipated when she became pregnant, so that her child would not be, her first child would not be a slave. So the father of that child probably, you know, did not want his child, because remember, we talk about this many times, your status is whatever your mother's status is. So if your mother is a slave at the time you're born, you are also a slave. Even if your father owned the plantation, even if your father was a president of the United States, if your mother that gave birth to you was a slave, you would be property as well. So she was emancipated in 1804, likely because she was pregnant and to avoid giving birth to a child that would be human chattel.
And that word emancipated, I know I want to kind of deviate a little bit. Emancipated in 1804. In my mind, I'm thinking, I mean, how did that look like? You know, here is a young slave. When they say you are emancipated on this day, is it somebody coming and telling you, say, well, right now you're free to go, or did she run away, or you know?
No, emancipation is a legal process. It's not running away.
Okay.
If you escape slavery, you're not emancipated. Emancipation meant that the deeds, these people held deeds because these were property, right? So you were human property. They held deeds for your bondage. They could insure you as property. And so when she was emancipated, she was given documents to show that no one owned her.
So when you were emancipated, were you sent away to, you know, my brain is kind of going some ways now. It's like, okay, you are emancipated, go on your own. Are you given a land? Are you given a place to go? Do you know what you're doing? Do you know what you're going into?
It's a different story for different people. I mean, you can be emancipated and remain right on the plantation. I understand that she went to Norfolk, Virginia, which was not, you know, very far away from where she was born, and there's not really a lot of records on, you know, how she managed to finance this, or if the person who impregnated her put her up in a place to live, because she had several more children after her first child.
So we continue with Amelia Roberts. The children: Uriah Jenkins, Joseph Jenkins, Elizabeth Jenkins, William Jenkins, Henry Jenkins, Mary Jenkins, and John Wright.
Yes. So Amelia curiously had all of her children's names until the point she was married to Mr. Roberts. All her children's names were Jenkins. And Uriah Jenkins was born in 1805. So it's likely when she was impregnated in 1804, she had her son a few months later, the following year.
Interesting. So she's Amelia Roberts. She's naming her children Jenkins.
Her name was not Roberts at the time.
Right.
She later married John Roberts.
John Roberts. So she was Amelia Jenkins Roberts.
She was just Amelia. She was just Amelia.
So where does Jenkins come from?
She was born property. She died Amelia Roberts. Many enslaved people did not have last names. So when you were emancipated, whatever they called you, if it was John Boy, if it was Toby, if it was Amelia, that was your name. You did not have the right to inherit a name, nor did you have a right to pass a name on to anyone when you're property.
Right.
So she was emancipated. Her name was Amelia, and that is all. So if you look at a lot of emancipation records for slaves, it's only a name, a single name. So I want everyone to understand that until she was 15 years old, someone held a deed to her existence. And so when people were emancipated, often they just took a name from wherever. Yeah. You know, sometimes they took it from the plantation that they lived at. I mean, they did this all over the world. You know, you've got the Padmores of Liberia. They took their name from Padmore Plantation in Barbados. So when you don't have a name, you just take one. So Amelia, as far as I can tell from the records, was just Amelia until she married Mr. Roberts.
And so do we know who the biological father of these children? Uriah, Joseph, Elizabeth, William?
We don't know. I don't know for certain, and I haven't found any evidence that anyone else knows for certain, but there's some speculation. So we will get into the speculation, and we will say that this is not established history. When we get into the speculation, I'll be very clear. You know, there's going to be question marks and stuff, but the common consensus is that it was a Welshman named Jenkins. So which one of the Jenkins brothers is the question? So it's not a question whether or not his father was a Welshman named Jenkins, it's which one of the brothers. So the speculation is which one of the Welsh brothers named Jenkins fathered these children. And unfortunately, it's possible that they both did, right? But, you know, we'll assume it was one.
And that, so that Welshman, that's a European.
European American.
Yeah, European American.
Mm-hmm.
So Amelia met and married James Robert, a free black boatman from Petersburg, Virginia.
Yes. So he was a full-blooded African, James Roberts. And so Amelia was able to marry him because she couldn't marry a white person. Even though she was, you know, mixed, she could only marry a black person. And her children were extremely fair-skinned because she, being biracial, having children with a Welshman or Welsh men, she, you know, was, what's the best way to put this? So she was fortunate to have been able to meet Mr. Roberts, who was very successful as a boatman for that time period. And he took her and her children in and basically gave them all the name Roberts. So James Roberts was not their biological father, but he did take on the responsibility of caring for Amelia and her children.
That's a real Liberian man.
So she took on the responsibility of taking care of Uriah and Joseph and Elizabeth and William and Henry and Mary. And then John Wright may have been Robert's biological child.
Okay.
Because he's the only one of her children who did not have the Jenkins name.
But he was John Wright Roberts.
He was just called John Wright. So it may have been John Wright Roberts, but his name is always just written as John Wright.
And then for this boatman, for some who don't know, boatman was someone who works on boat, or you rent them out, or what?
So he worked on a boat and he used to engage in trade. He basically, just like we talked about E.J. Roy's father, he was a ferryman. He conducted the ferry from between Norfolk and Petersburg, Virginia, along the river.
And I'm asking all these questions because all this is going to come in play when Joseph Jenkins Roberts is president. We'll see how that works. So we have Isaac Jenkins with a question mark, 1789 to 1834, born in Virginia, United States, on September 21, 1753, to Amos Jenkins and Jane Chandler.
Mm-hmm. So Amos could possibly be the grandfather of Joseph, the biological grandfather of Joseph Jenkins. So Isaac may or may not have been his father.
So what brought Isaac into the picture? Was it some of the speculation?
Proximity to Amelia, you know, his proximity to Norfolk. So there's a lot of circumstantial evidence pointing to him, but that hasn't been substantiated. They may have to do, I don't know, they might have to do some kind of DNA from one of Roberts, the descendants of J.J. Roberts' brothers, with the descendants of this Jenkins family to connect them. That would really be the only way to really prove it, unless there's some record somewhere or document somewhere that no one's aware of yet, buried in someone's archive or something. But for now, it's speculation. And his Joseph Jenkins Roberts brothers, who emigrated to Liberia with him, do have descendants.
Right. So Amos Jenkins, who was probably the grandfather of Joseph,
possibly, not probably, possibly.
Yeah, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
Possibly. Okay, this is possible. And then the son Isaac.
Yeah, so Isaac, it would have been in proximity and age-wise, and could have possibly fathered these children.
Being the father. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then we have Thomas, who is Isaac's brother. So we're able to find Thomas's birth record. But he got married to Caroline Minor. So we can look at even Isaac and Caroline's descendants and then compare those to the descendants of Joseph, Joseph's brothers, Bishop Roberts, and also Dr. Roberts' descendants, and see if they have any connection.
Oh, okay. Once it Bible records, what is that?
Oh, this is these are from a church archive.
Okay.
People got married in church. They got baptized in church. So churches keep a lot of records. If you're trying to find records, genealogy records on anyone, church records are, church and county records are really good resources.
Yeah. And in Bible too, you can have your family there, the names. So when I saw that, that's why I was thinking about, like, in your Bible, there's a page there. The first page you have family, so you can list that. So that could be one. So now we have the family in the United States. It's time to go to Liberia. Joseph Jenkins Roberts and family left Norfolk, Virginia for Liberia on the ship Harriet in March 1829. His mother, Amelia, and 5 of her 7 children made up one household, and Joseph Jenkins Roberts registered separately with his wife, Sarah, and an infant child who died soon after arriving in Liberia. Oh, so J.J. Roberts had his own record.
His own. What do you mean record?
Registration. So they're going to
Liberia. So when you register to travel to Liberia, you register with your family unit.
Yeah.
So because he was married, he's not going to go under the umbrella of his mother. So he was head of household for himself, his wife, and his infant child. And his mother registered as head of household for herself and her other children who were unwed. So Uriah did not go. Joseph's older brother Uriah did not go to Liberia. And John Roberts was deceased.
Okay.
So this is really important to understand that Amelia took 5 of her children with her under this umbrella. If you go to the next slide, you'll be able to see, the slide after this, but yeah. So basically they boarded the ship Harriet and it arrived in Monrovia on March 24th of 1829. So another misnomer that people have is that I've heard people say, I don't know how many people think this, but people believe Joseph Jenkins Roberts arrived in Liberia in 1822. No, he did not. He arrived on March 24th, 1829.
Yeah.
So he wasn't among, Elijah Johnson and or even Carey. He was on the Nautilus or the group that went to Sierra Leone on the Elizabeth. He came on the Harriet.
Okay. And now we have the records.
Yes.
We have Amelia E.J. Roberts, W.J. Roberts, J.W. Roberts. So this, and we have Mary and J.J. Roberts, Sarah, the wife, and
Mm-hmm.
infant Robert.
Yeah. So it's cut off at the top there a little bit, but basically it shows how many of them were able to read and write in this column. So EJ, who was 18, he could write and I don't know what that C stands for, but he was literate. Joseph was, when it says liberal, means he was pretty educated. So he could read, write very well. His sister, his wife, Sarah, who was very young, 18 years old, was literate. She could write. So you have a 21-year-old married to an 18-year-old with an infant. And from all accounts, I mean, this was like, the love of his life. This Sarah Roberts was his entire world. So the unfortunate thing, if you look over in the right column, this list of dates or years, these are the years that these people all died.
Hmm.
So his mother, the first thing that happened was his infant died the same year that they arrived.
Yeah.
His wife, who he was in Liberia with for about 9 years.
Right. 9 years later, she died.
She died after grieving the loss of their only child. For 9 years, she then succumbed to disease, unspecified. It just says female disease. I don't know what that means.
Right.
It is possible, she died in childbirth. It's possible that she had, some kind of cancer. No real description. But she dies 9 years after they arrive.
Right.
This shapes this. So he has these two immense tragedies that occur. And this shapes his mindset. This trauma shapes his mindset. Unfortunately, he also lost his brother before his wife died in 1833.
Yeah.
And and this is his younger brother, his baby brother. This is his mother's last boy child. He dies. And they say the cause of death is unknown. And then his mother dies in 1839. Then his brother, who was next to him, dies in 1843.
And the cause of death is consumption. He probably ate something.
Well, consumption is like
Drunken?
dysentery or something.
Okay. Wow. So from 40, so barely, barely 50 years old, the mom died.
Yeah. But look at the amount of children she had back to back, in those days, with that kind of, in that kind of world. But she was 40 years old when she went to Liberia, and then, she died 10 years later.
10 years later.
So
Sarah, the wife, is not even 30 years yet. She died.
Yeah.
It's what a tragedy.
So his very young wife is gone. She left no children behind. His mother's gone, who he was incredibly fond of and close to. His baby brother dies, and Joseph. It was an incredible tragedy.
Now we have Joseph Jenkins Roberts and his two brothers, Henry and John, became prominent citizens of Liberia.
Yeah. So Henry and John, if you go back, Henry Henry became so there's a little bit of a discrepancy because it says that Henry died, and Henry was only 10 years old when he went, if you go back to the record. So this is the official manifest, the official record. And William and Henry were supposedly the two youngest who survived. I want to believe, and I have to, like I said, I can't change the record because this is what it says, but it's not really consistent. So what I want to believe is that it was actually J.W. who died in 1833, but I have to really be able to prove that.
Mm.
But this is what the record states, exactly like this. So, maybe somebody miscalculated.
Right.
Because I do know that Henry and John were just close in age. And we don't really have any account for J.W. It may have also been, anyway, let's not speculate. But I just wanted to point out that discrepancy. So sometimes when you're combing through these records, you'll see one account, one place, and then you'll see, oh, but then wait a minute, why is he still alive? And, and being prominent. So you go back and say, oh, maybe it was one of the other brothers and they just calculated it wrong. So I just wanted to put that out there, and I didn't make any changes to the record because I'm not at liberty to do so. I have to present it just as I saw it. And you'll see me do that periodically. You can draw your own conclusions, but I'm not going to make corrections when I don't know where the correction needs to be made. All I can do is point out the discrepancy. Okay.
So right now on this page, now our assumption is Henry did not die. He was unsuccessful.
He definitely. Well, okay. So is it possible we changed his name? I don't know. So there's possibilities, but his brother Henry does go on to live, right? So I have to, like I said, I can speculate and say they made a mistake on who died in 1833. That's the most probable explanation for the discrepancy. But Henry Roberts did go to medical school and become a doctor.
And when it says here that he was unsuccessful, so people that went to Liberia, they have money or they still had a connection to come back and go to school. It was not like, hey, go to Liberia, you're never coming back. Some of them were going back and forth. I want you to speak to that. In the case of Henry, he was able to go back, get an education, not just anyone, but as a medical doctor.
Right. So Henry, many people were going back and forth between the United States and Liberia. We've talked about this repeatedly. Henry went to school and he returned. There were also a lot of recaptured Africans, which were the majority of people repatriated through ACS and the U.S., especially the U.S. government, who were not American, really had absolutely no tie to America at all. Some were rescued from illegal slave ships in U.S. territory, in U.S. territorial waters. May have, like, for example, the people who established New Georgia, they went to Savannah, where they were in tribunal in Savannah, Georgia. And so if you're in tribunal, for 6 months and then they send you back, you don't really have any ties to the United States. So many of the recaptured Africans were not really at this kind of liberty to go back and forth. However, that being said, you did have a lot of church groups and mission work going on. So a lot of these missionaries were doing programs where they would help people get higher education, both in Freetown and at the various colonies that later became like the Republic of Liberia. So you had even indigenous people who had gone to mission schools, had only gone so far and said, I want to go further in school. They would be able to take ships and go to the States with the help of these church groups, especially the Methodist Episcopal Church would then take people and you could further your studies. Theology was usually number one, and then medicine. So those are the two areas where the African Methodist Episcopal Church and the Methodist Episcopal Church, and later others, were able to help people go to school.
Interesting. And William King here said, Call your gaps on Henry Roberts can be filled by his great-grandchildren, one being Charles Abel King, who is the uncle of William King.
Okay, whether or not he's saying whether or not he could have been, he changed his name, or if it was his brother that died and not him. Okay, so I don't know if you would know that, if he would know that, but I'll ask him. I know William. But yeah, I mean, I know Charles. I'm sorry, I don't know William. I know Charles. But yeah, it's funny. Oral history is just fishy all the way around. I listen to it and I always try to substantiate it with documents.
So Joseph Jenkins Roberts started off as a merchant and was later appointed as the first African governor of Liberia, a position he held for 6 years before ascending to the presidency when Liberia became a republic in 1847.
Exactly. So I do need to say something important. We're talking about Henry trying to be a merchant and not being very good at it. Joseph Jenkins Roberts was kind of served as almost a middleman for American traders. So his success, his economic success, was really as, working closely with ACS and their investors. So his brother didn't do that and wasn't able to achieve the same amount of success. So he chose to further his education and become a doctor, which was very much needed in Liberia at the time.
So he said, "Hey, Mr. Jenkins, Ms. Joe, you can go on with your politics. I'm going to do medicine."
Right.
So I'm thinking now. I mean, Joseph Jenkins Roberts was not in the first group. He went later on 1829, but by 1847 he was able to rise to the point of becoming governor. I wonder what sets him apart to get to this point.
To become the governor, again, when he was a merchant, when he was being a trader, he was basically a middleman. So he was there, he was present, he was working very closely with the European American merchants and the ACF investors. So he was in favor with them. He was making sure that their businesses were successful, and therefore he was able to succeed off of the crumbs, right? So that was the kind of mindset he had. If we keep buttressing the interests of the ACS investors, because it was an economic venture. American Colonization Society should have been called, the Liberia Company, because the Sierra Leone Company was called the Sierra Leone Company because it was transparent about it being an economic venture. And so the ACS was similar to the Sierra Leone Company, in fact, modeled after it. So this was an investment for a lot of these people that we like to call philanthropists. So they were involved in trade, and in very exploitative trade as well. So Roberts, basically, pandered to them and allowed, himself to grow because he was doing their bidding. And that's how he became successful and became their very much trusted and respected ally.
Yeah. Now I get it. He was a friend, and so who can better represent our interests here than Joseph?
Right.
So, as a colonial governor, Roberts appeared before a large and respectable audience at the Tabernacle, New York, where he made some interesting statements respecting an exploring tour he had made in the interior of the region outside of the territory, meaning that Monrovia enclave.
Yes. So outside of you're right. So this is when he was first appointed, governor. He was the first. Roberts was the first African governor of the settlement at Liberia, and so this was a really big deal. 1834. I mean, this is the time Roberts is achieving greatness. He's merging all of the colonies, because we talked about this in the past, that there were separate colonies along the coast, and they were not connected. In between the colonies were basically, other communities and other groups of people, other nations, right? So you've got there's a colony at Riverside, there's a colony, Mississippi Colonization Society, Maryland. You've got, all these colonization societies along the coast. He becomes governor. And one of the things that he achieves is drawing everyone together to become a commonwealth. Roberts was very adamant about touring all of the colonization societies and all of the settlements along the coast. He did a very good job at, I'm trying to choose my words because there were some conflicts that he had to go and settle. We'll talk about that as well. But basically, he went along the coast and he traveled to some of these towns that had not been settled or explored by the ACS or any of the other colonization societies. People who had not yet had contact with the colonization societies. If you go on to the next slide, we'll see what he says about that.
So this is what he said. He explained that after 3 days' travel, the party reached Jetty, where they were surprised to hear the inhabitants generally speak English. And the old chief seemed very happy to see quit men. At nearby Zando's town, English was also spoken by most of the inhabitants. But he thought he made English.
So he was surprised because here again, we've been in very detailed, but here's Robert saying what we've always been saying on the History Channel. They came and met people speaking English. They met westernized Africans. It was not the introduction of Western civilization when they arrived in 1822. People had English names. Nobody gave Boatswain the name Boatswain. Nobody gave Peter the name Peter. Nobody gave, King George the name George. These people were interacting with many, many different cultures for centuries, going back further than the actual transatlantic slave trade. So Roberts himself is explaining that, at Zando's town, English was also spoken by most of the inhabitants. So here he is speaking to this American audience, and they're all like, wow, really? I didn't know this. They're all, because the mindset. And it's interesting that most Liberians to this day believe that English was introduced to the coast of Liberia, what is now Liberia, by ACS and the colonial effort, the settlement.
I wonder where is this Zando's town today?
So it's somewhere between around Sino, I believe, somewhere around Riverside Sino area.
Because anyway, it's Robert's calling it Zando because, yeah.
And Jetty.
Yeah. Right.
That's how they spelled it, right? So if it sounds familiar to you, if it sounds like something that might be spelled differently today, write it in the comments.
Right. So Zando. So we want to see this could be maybe around Bassa. Bassa people like Z.
Yeah, Jetty, Sando. Yeah. It could also be Sando. I mean, Sando. We have the name Sando, right?
Right.
Could that have been what ethnic group is Sando?
Vi.
Okay.
Vi has Sando, and other ethnic groups have Sando too.
Okay.
Happen to have.
I'm gonna Zeddy, Jetty. Vi people say Jetty. You remember when we talked about all the Vi settlements in Bassa and Riverside?
Yeah.
earlier on when the whole Koya Kingdom story about how the Vi Kingdom pushed eastward, and then you had remnants of them, and they referred to them as the. So when Benjamin Anderson talks about the capital of the Western Mandingos, the Vi that had pushed eastward were considered the Eastern Mandingos because they were Muslim. So if you had Zondo's town and Chetty's town or whatever, if that were the case, they probably no longer exist.
Yeah.
They've probably been, pushed out by the original Bassa inhabitants by now. Especially by 1900, I'm sure they would no longer exist. Very few of the original Vi settlements exist. Just remnants of the culture you can find in the Southeast.
Yeah. So imagine if we were in Robert's days, and Robert is making this speech in New York. What would be the reaction of the people? Maybe some would say, "Wow." Others would say, get out of here. So Governor Roberts said, this is what he said: the Liberians are laborious, active people, a church-going people, a temperance people. The colony, with its well-organized government, was very serviceable in settling differences between the chiefs of the surrounding tribes and thus preventing war, plunder, and bloodshed. Liberians have been hardworking, church-going.
Yes. So Roberts was extremely violent as a colonial governor. When I say extremely violent, I mean he settled things, but he's saying he's preventing plunder and bloodshed, but really he went in when there were slave factories anywhere, when there was anything that gave him a reason to go in and lay down the law, he took that upon himself and did so with force. He was a forceful colonial governor. We don't really talk about that much. During this period, he really had no tolerance at all for slavery, and there are many accounts of Roberts, especially even going westward into Cape Mount, stamping out slave factories. So Roberts was an enemy of Pedro Blanco and that whole European unlawful slave trading network. So at this point, the transatlantic slave trade is illegal, but it's still going on. They're still capturing people, and in some cases, you're talking about forced labor, but most cases it's actual chattel slavery that they're still. The kings are bringing captives down to the coast. They're being kept in these makeshift, what they called factories, and then there's these Portuguese and Spanish boats would come and pick these people up. So Roberts was incredibly intolerant. I mean, almost, I would say heroic. I mean, I of course would have been an abolitionist if I was alive at that time. But he didn't do this as he's presenting it with some kind of, soft power negotiations. I'm sure he did do that whenever possible. But for the most part, Roberts was violent. He was doing these things with force, stamping out slavery with force. Now, if it was intra-ethnic warfare and battles, they did, in fact, try to negotiate those and try to settle those differences peacefully. But where, again, I cannot overemphasize, where he did not have tolerance was when it came to chattel slavery.
Right. And what were some of those things that he was violent against besides slavery?
That's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. He handled those things with violence.
Right. So this man is, although he was born free, but he knows what slavery is. So.
I mean, yeah, they deplored the idea. They knew, so this was not something. We can speculate, right? I don't know if Roberts was always this kind of person, but you have to remember, by the time he becomes governor, he no longer is a nice guy if he was a nice guy before. So his temperament was very impatient and intolerant. Liberia was now all he had. He did get remarried, but he did get remarried, but it wasn't the same. It just wasn't the same.
Mm.
It was a formality.
And I'm looking at what he put together here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Liberals, active people, a church-going people, and he talked about temperance. The colony with its well-organized, or is the colony that has a well-organized government.
Mm-hmm.
So people that are church-going, and when he say a temperance people, I don't know, and church-going, I don't know if the two went together. What is Robert trying to convey here?
So he's basically saying that, so if you remember, the Commonwealth of Liberia was considered a Christian colony.
Yeah.
The flag of the Commonwealth of Liberia looked like the modern flag of Liberia, except it had a cross instead of a star. So the Commonwealth flag having a cross instead of a star, the whole mindset of this, because it wasn't a country, it was a settlement of Christians, so they thought, right? And onward Christian soldiers, right? That's what this was about. So he had to let everyone know, like, hey, these are a church-going, Christian-based people. I must point out, when people give Roberts the credit of establishing Liberia, it's almost like, what is wrong with you? Everything that Roberts stood for is what those men went into the Constitutional Committee session and almost dismantled, because those men were statesmen and they were thinking for themselves. They weren't trying to appease the American Colonization Society and other Christian philanthropist groups. They were saying, no, we are establishing a country here. Everyone is not Christian here. They removed the cross and replaced it with a star. And they wrote into the Constitution provisions for religious freedom that remain to this day. This was in 1847. This was so progressive. They had done things that most places in the world had not done yet.
Yeah.
So, very, very important.
Yeah. So Robert is presenting this good side. They are temperance people, they are church-going. The colony it has a well-organized government. We've been very serviceable in settling the differences, the chiefs in the surrounding tribe. And as a result, we have prevented war, plunder, and bloodshed.
Yeah.
That's typical of how we go to America and make these speeches so as to get what we want.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think it is what he believes. So, it's 8:21. We can get into the presidency a bit. I wanted to make this more interactive and kind of find out what kinds of questions people have.
Yeah. That's what I'm trying to do now. Okay. So we can go into comments, open the phone lines. I know we've already gone almost an hour, so we can go into our comments and see what people are thinking. And we open the phone line so that you can be a part of it and call and let's know, before we start the whole thing on the president today, kind of introductory part. Let's look at some comments here.
Okay.
All right. This one, Riverside Pro said, greeting from Riverside County, and he's not in Riverside County.
Don't mind.
Destiny say hi. He's advertising here. If you need a GMB song, he did. Call me. The Holland D legal declaration of emancipation were issued to them. We were talking about that. He also said, thank you for opening our horizon. Jimmy is watching. Professor Larry Davis, Ms. Call, thank you for your research. It's a fact that the vast majority of African Americans are mixed. Even now, Evis says he's not a big fan of J.J. Roberts. Evis, please let us know why. Anderson Boley is saying hi. Franklin is watching from Logantown, Boucher Island. Franklin, thank you for watching. Evis is asking if J. Robert was governor. Who made him governor?
Any more questions?
Jimmy said there are some accounts that mention Lord Carey was a co-founder and the first Black governor of Liberia. Would you like to comment? And another question, was it only slavery that Joseph Jenkins Roberts was brutal towards? Evans mentioned he was also intolerant to dark-skinned people. Aliu V. Samba, he talked about church going, but what he forgot to mention was before he came to Liberia, Muslims existed centuries. Temperance means the people who don't drink or engage in sinful activity. Yeah. Mohammed Salia Dukle, just listening today, this is very interesting. Evis is waiting on the line. William King, called thanks for speaking more to the person and circumstances shaped and formed them into the leaders they became. So these are some of the questions that we have, Carl.
Awesome. So let me see quickly. One of them talked about church going. Okay, I'm going to go backwards. Aliu, this man is talking about the Liberians. At this point, it was a colony, a settlement of people. And anyone who was entering the colony to be part of the colony at this point in history, this is before it became a republic, had to adopt Christianity. He's not addressing the religious and indigenous beliefs of the people who existed before Muslims and Christians came into the land. He's speaking specifically to the settlement, the Christian settlement that they called Liberia at the time. Which did not include, Mississippi and Africa or Maryland or any of the other settlements along the coast. So, it's interesting to me. People always like to say, oh, Muslims were there first. No, Muslims were not there first. Christians were not there first. The people who were there first had religions. They believed in God also. And I think it's very condescending for people to act like we didn't know God before we adopted religions. So I just wanted to say that. The other thing I will go to as well, there was a question about Lord Carey. So Lord Carey was not appointed as a governor. Lord Carey was abandoned. The whole settlement was abandoned, and I addressed that in a previous episode. I'm not going to go too far into it, but Lord Carey was just in charge by default. And he was never officially recognized as governor. It was just because, they abandoned, the European Americans abandoned them there to be killed. And by, miracle and the grace of many indigenous people, they were not wiped off the face of the earth and written off in history as a footnote, but lived on to welcome more immigrants, both in recaptured Africans and repatriated African Americans, and go on to establish the oldest republic in Africa. So, you could say that, but Lord Carey wasn't really an official governor. He was just acting in the absence of the white power representatives. Any more questions I'm missing? I think I addressed that one. Someone asked me who appointed Joseph Jenkins Roberts. The board of the American Colonization Society appointed him as governor. It was a board.
Yeah, and Ever was asking whether he was only intolerant to What else was he intolerant to?
So I don't believe that Joseph Jenkins Roberts was intolerant to dark-skinned people. I mean, he chose a very Black man, a 100% African man who was so African that they took him from the settlement because they said, "What y'all doing with our child?" You know, and so he was kidnapped. So Stephen Allen Benson was his vice president. He had many. His father, who raised him, John Roberts, was a very Black African man who was not biracial. So I don't have evidence that he was intolerant or discriminatory towards dark-skinned people. What Roberts had a problem with, and was not violent towards, but what he was discriminatory towards were the recaptured Africans. I mean, that's clearly documented. He didn't want as many of them coming. He wanted to see more African Americans and people from the Caribbean coming to Liberia, as opposed to the groups that were coming from the Niger Delta region and Congo Basin.
Thank you. And William is asking, were there not Christian there centuries ago as well? And before you answer that, let me bring Aliyu again. Then this is why I'm very apprehensive about Liberian history, period. The truth of Liberia's history has yet to be told. Writers of Liberian history has always written based on their own spiritual and cultural acceptance, period. Any group who did not conform to their norms were extracted from the history of Liberia.
I don't think that's a fully true statement. In fact, I don't know where that's coming from. I study a lot. I read a lot. So Joseph Jenkins Roberts is addressing people at a church, and he's talking to them about a group of religious people. We wouldn't know the names of anyone of our ancestors on the Grain Coast if Christians didn't write them down. Because even the Islamic manuscripts that were rescued from Musadu were rescued by Benjamin Joseph Knight Anderson and preserved by Edward Wilmot Blyden. We have to really stop this us against them, mentality. History. This is not about religious history. This is about what occurred in a particular time and place, who the actors were, who were making decisions. And so the context of this story is not to invent the idea that people were excluded when, in fact, their presence is well documented.
Yeah.
By the very people you claim are excluding them. I mean, it's just a bizarre argument.
And Cole, I like what you said, because Joseph Jenkins Roberts is making a report to the church. So, for God's sake, do you expect Joseph Jenkins Roberts to say, definitely you're going to say, it was hallelujah time, we're in church, and we were, I mean, he's not going to say.
Besides that, you couldn't practice Islam in the settlement. You couldn't practice traditional spirituality in the settlement. You couldn't practice Yoruba religion in the settlement. You could not practice Ogun in the settlement. You couldn't practice anything but Christianity in the settlement. It was not until independence that they stopped doing that. It wasn't until 1847. Right. So even the recaptured Africans that were coming with the various religions from all over the place, they were not allowed. So it doesn't mean that they weren't present. It means that the settlement was a Christian settlement, hence the cross on the flag. This is a fact of history. And we are not here to, we act as though it's strange. It was the 1800s. When Samori Toure created a state, you had to be Muslim. When the indigenous people formed a federation, you had to be a part of the religious sect as well. That is how the world works. It's not a matter of us against them. It's a matter of, this is a fact of history. This is how human beings thought and behaved and conducted themselves 200 years ago.
Right. And I think sometimes what we are missing is what is history? So when somebody writes, Aliyu say, these people, the truth about history, writers of Liberian history extract this, right? People are extracted from history. Then you ask yourself, okay, what is this history? Is when you say history, is it something written by A. Doris Bank Henry? Is it something written by say Guano? Is it so? What when we say the people, this is not in history? What does that mean, right? You explained the other day that when say Dr. Guano referred to history, we're talking about the curriculum.
Right. Right.
So when Aliyu, please clarify when you say this was extracted from Liberian history, or the novel extracted from the history of Liberia, what do you mean? I want you to clarify on that. Let me take our first caller here, and that's Mr. Evis Morris. Evis, you're live.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ja, and thanks to Ms. Carr for her laborious scholarship on Liberian history. I really appreciate it. And I'm always saying as the contrarian on these topics when I call into the show, but I always, I want to get a different perspective from her on this topic. Mr. Ja, yourself on the show, and I would like for you to bring in some of the sentiments that we as Liberians have, in our country. You yourself, as along with many other Liberians, have heard a lot of things about Joseph Jenkins Roberts, and I think it would have been good for you to bring up some of those, things that we heard, and maybe Ms. Call clarify, because most of the time when she's speaking about the history of, these early Liberian presidents and leaders, we never hear about them from the perspective of the native that they interacted with. Because people who write history, some of them have implicit biases where they might try to favor, the person that they're talking about, or try to paint them in a particular light. But we also need to hear it from the other side too, because if you're telling us you was this great person who was, righteous against the things of slavery, fine. If that's how we're going to read it. But if we're just hearing the history from one side and we're not hearing how he interacted with the quote-unquote native people, or how they view him, then we're not getting the clearest picture of him. So again, I just want Ms. Call to maybe talk about it, and maybe in future episodes she can, if she has that information, she can look at these people from not just one perspective, but perhaps from the natives or other people who dealt with them, who wasn't a part of them, quote-unquote. Thank you again. Maybe she can elaborate on this topic. I don't know. It's not really a question. It's more of a comment mixed with a question, but hopefully she's trying to understand the gist of what I'm asking in a sense. Thank you again for taking my call.
Thank you.
So I made a very clear statement about Joseph Jenkins Roberts being in violent opposition to slavery. And I am an African person, and I see African people as African people. I don't see African people as non-Africans doing things to Africans, as many of you do. So when I'm speaking from the perspective of an Africanist. Joseph Jenkins Roberts was an abolitionist. Joseph Jenkins Roberts liberated people who were in shackles, being prepared to be sold. And he did so by raising arms against their captors. These are facts of history. These are facts that are documented not only by Roberts, but also by the slave traders themselves who hated him. So as an Indigenous woman who had relatives, ancestral relatives sold into slavery, I would have definitely understood this as being a good thing. When we talk about the perspective of the natives as if it's some one group of people, who are the natives? Are they the people that were in the shackles getting ready to be sold? Or are the natives the people who were these people who had them in shackles and were trying to profit off of the sale of human beings? So which native perspective are we talking about here? So the slave dealers didn't like the settlement. So many of the monarchs and the distance traders hated the settlement. And it wasn't really about religion. It was about these people want to stop the slave trade. But guess what? The majority of human beings that we refer to as natives welcomed the settlement because it was liberating them. And this is what Liberians continue to confuse. It is absolute common sense. If you're in the midst of a circumstance where one of the dominant means of trade and wealth is to loot and maraud villages and towns and grab innocent young people, usually children and women, and sell them into slavery. What about their perspective? We talk about things being covered up in history. The biggest cover up in history is indigenous, what we call native people, literally erasing the chattel slavery and the wars that occurred amongst ourselves and painting this erroneous, false picture of some homogeneous group of people called natives who all had the same mind and the same perspective. There were victims, there were perpetrators, there were villains, there were heroes. And we should, of course, present the picture. But as we look at things, we do things based on what there is evidence of. And the evidence points out that Roberts, as I rightfully stated, pandered to the sponsors, the financiers of the American Colonial ACS, the American Colonization Society. At the same time, Roberts being a adamant, inadamant opposition to slavery. He wasn't just an abolitionist, believing it needed to be abolished. He wanted to completely stamp it out anywhere in the vicinity of the colony. And he was successful in doing so. So is that a bad thing? I mean, what other perspective would there be? I mean, are we supposed to say, oh, the men stop our eating? We supposed to be vexed because Joseph Roberts stopped our eating? We're trying to sell people. I mean, I see myself as probably would have been the one being sold. So I'm sorry if I'm not sorry, but I will say it's unfortunate if that makes you feel good.
I lost you there, Carl.
Okay. Let me go and come back.
Yeah, we lost you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Liberian History Channel. If you're just joining, please call us and be a part of the show. The numbers is scrolling down the screen right there, so you can call and take part. 605-313-6004. The code is 791-403#. You call that and you can join the conversation. We are talking about Joseph Jenkins Roberts. Joseph Jenkins Roberts, that's the first president of Liberia. He was also the governor before independence. Few more comments here. D is saying, thank you, Carl. I'm watching alone. Massa Carey, Liberia does not have a perfect written history, just like the United States and other countries. And Massa say, you're doing great to teach us our history. At this time, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to get a few more callers on the line. The people calling now. So when we come back, we're going to get them on the line. Keep tuned. Welcome back to Focus on Liberia. This is the Liberia History Channel, and we are discussing President Joseph Jenkins Roberts. Let me get two more callers on the line. We have Mohammed Salia Dukle calling us from Sydney, Australia. Mohammed, come on today.
Yeah. Come on, see. Good morning from my end to all our listeners. And and good morning to my teacher, Professor Cole. Thank you very much. I'm calling because I want to say one or two to. I've been reading Aliu V. Samba comment, and he expresses sentiment that most of us had, or most of us still having, before and now. So what I try to say on that is the idea that Muslims were excluded from the history of Liberia, as Professor Cole said. That idea, I've come to realize that's not true. Muslims are included, they are there. Now, what we've not addressed before and now is being addressed is the idea that the general misconception that Liberia is a Christian state. Like my brother, the first caller said, a lot of other ideas that perceptions that Indigenous have, you needed to be asking them for clarification. One of those misconception or misperception is the idea that Liberia as a state is a Christian state. That's wrong. It's now that through Cole research, she's finding a clear logical answers for that. And the answer she go over tonight, saying that no, that was wrong. But as a colony, when the ACS established a colony, established it as a Christian colony. And everything they were doing there was Christian focused. Indigenous people, indigenous religion was not there. Foreign society was not allowed there. Islam was not allowed there. There were different people on their own. So when you're talking about their history as a colony, of course, it will be Christian focused. Now, they've gone through that until when the independence, the constitution that was written to declare Liberia as independent state, they clearly enshrine in their religious plurality. And they clearly said this country is not a Christian country. Well, how did they clearly say that? That was demonstrated when they suggested to change the flag, to remove the cross, to put the stars there. And with enshrine phrases that there are other people with different faiths who are equally member of the state, and they have to live here in harmony. So that answer we just seen recently is just such a big eye opener. It levels us to carry the message to correct these misconceptions instead of being angry about it. Thank you very much.
So, Mohammed, before you go, this idea that Liberia is a Christian state, where is it? Where is that? Is it in any book? When you say Liberia is a Christian state, who is saying that? And where is that? Where are we quoting this from?
Very good. I just go back to your last caller who said, and a lot of idea on the ground. These are general knowledge on the ground. They're saying that people have said it, you've heard it. The pastors recently who put themselves together to go when Edward Snow passed the bill that they should have a Muslim holiday. The group of pastors that joined together, they repeated the phrase.
Okay.
That this country is a Christian country, and they will be quoting things from before Liberia, that is the colony. When people were on Bushra Island, they was completely different thing to what Liberia is.
Right. Exactly.
Thank you.
And
thank you. I mean, people will always say things, but sometimes when people say this, it looks like it's anywhere written or it's part of the Constitution or something that this is a Christian state. That's the clarity that I wanted. Let me go to Jimmy
Eastman. It's not written in the Constitution. And this is why, through your show, and I really thank you, that we come to realize sometimes these things are not written. And it's just important we seek the knowledge and take our time to educate other people. So your show bringing and what you bring out to us is a lot of information that correct the misconceptions we have before. Remember, let me give you one example. We all do it, we still do it. Hello, am I still on?
Yeah,
yes.
We're still on. And we're getting tired with you now.
No, we're not tired with you.
no, just one more comment I just making. For example, yesterday someone was telling me when they were growing up to 9, he's down 50 years, he does it. Everywhere you urinate, you have to spit on it. Where did you get that idea from? So I don't know from Liberia when I was small, I said you got to do it when you urinate. So even in a Camo, in Sydney, one of the best cities in the world, you have to do it. He said, yes. I said, okay, that's how people grow with misconceptions. Anyway, I'm sorry. Thank you.
No, you're good. And so that you do that, you spit on it so that somebody will not put koa on you.
Yeah, only funny stuff. How can you be all the way in Sydney in morning to and do that? So for me, it helps me to say, you know what? Instead of me getting angry, I should actually learn and educate someone else. I should always feel sorry that we were fed so many things that we need to learn and go. That's why I really, really appreciate Professor Cole.
And Mohammed, before you go, it's also the way sometimes we get vexed with about other Christian or Muslim, as if it is our own. We don't even get angry about the traditional Liberian religion that were there, right? We kind of try to.
we have to do layers of misconceptions, and we pick and choose what is suitable for us at the time. We pick and choose. Even when we get angry about Islam, well, sometimes you pick and choose who Islam you're talking about. Is it a Mamadi Islam you're talking about, or is it Momoyan Islam you're talking about? we all just full of misconception or everywhere in there. Let me stop there so far.
Right. Thank you, Imam Dukli. You did
culture
well.
As strong as the Poro, and the Sunday, we don't even get best for that. But every time we. Anyway.
But man, you just told me to take your time with me.
No. Let me go to Jimmy. Jimmy, you're live.
Go on, bye. Hello.
Yeah, Jimmy, go ahead.
Yeah, a great show. Call as usual. You are a wealth of knowledge. And just to comment briefly about the religions, because my brother just left. I'm so happy that our Constitution allows religious freedom. Because even those who really study Christianity, you are instructed to not offend your neighbor. And if he finds offense of something you're doing, they tell you do not do it. So we have no reason to be vexed with any other religion practicing what they want to practice. So only a person who is not really a Christian will take arms against another belief. But what I wanted to say, what people find difficult swallowing, is that at the time when the settlers came, it was a common practice to sell each other. Africans were selling Africans. And then when you say this, they say, no, that was not true. That was rare. This was a common practice. They weren't looking at what the ramifications would be at the time. But I'm sure they knew there was something unconscionable about selling a person. So today, God is emphasizing and teaching us this was put halt to. This was an achievement in Liberia because around us was still being colonized, which is another kind of slavery. So, God, thank you again for clearing it up that Liberia was a haven to stop Africans being sold into slavery, which was...
And it was a refuge. Yes, it was a place of refuge. It was a place of refuge. Our population is extremely diverse and was extremely diverse early on. Because a lot of times, thanks, Mr. Eastman, I just wanted to buttress what you're saying. When people say, oh, they didn't allow Native people into I don't like the term Native. It doesn't make any sense in the context of Liberia. We have Indigenous people, and then you have people who were rescued from captivity on the coast at these various slave factories. Those people were treated the same way the recaptured Africans from Congo and these other places were treated. Some of these people were from ethnic groups that, like Mano, like my people, or Pele. Some of them were Bandi, some of them were Kisi, some of them were from different ethnic groups. You know, and these people could not go back where they came from, because if you ended up, you know, at a slave factory on the coast, chances are the place you came from has been destroyed. Chances are you're the remnants of people who've been taken into captivity because of war. So a lot of times those people didn't have homes to go back to in places that we now consider to be Nimba or Lofa or Grand Jita or these places. So they had been marched to the coast in captivity. They would then be incorporated into the settlements. They would be taught to speak English. They would be baptized. You know, that was the practice during the time of the Commonwealth before the Republic was established. So this program, we're talking about Joseph Jenkins Roberts, the colonial governor of the Commonwealth of Liberia. We're not yet talking about the country, the Republic of Liberia. So that clarification needs to be made. And there was no colonialism going on yet. It wasn't, the Berlin Conference had not occurred yet. And so the transatlantic slave trade was winding up, but it was really still continuing, because at this period, chattel slavery was still being practiced in the United States. The US had not yet had its civil war. So they still had a demand for new slaves. So people were still illegally importing slaves to the United States. Chattel slavery had not ended in Brazil, in Cuba. Most of these people that they were capturing and selling along the coast, who were liberated through extreme warfare and violence, right, were then reintroduced to the settlements as settlers. This is what people need to understand, that we keep forgetting, is that a lot of these people who were incorporated early on and baptized and given Christian names and educated, they were recaptured Africans, but a lot of them were recaptured indigenous people from right around the vicinity that were war victims. So when people talk about, oh, what about the perspective of the natives? Which people? We want to talk about the people who were engaged in cahoots with slave dealers. Are we talking about their victims who outnumbered them tremendously?
Thank you. And Carlos, Jimmy, before you continue, let us go more into Joseph Jenkins Roberts. It shouldn't be on the religion all the time. Go ahead, Jimmy, and your thoughts. So we have two more callers before we close.
Yeah, there's one other conflicting thing in me. Liberia, the way they try to establish it as a colonizer, I'd like to know Carl's perspective on that. It looked like the only playbook they had, even though it was also to spread Christianity, but they used that colonization playbook. In other words, taking land or establishing a colony, which means your allegiance is elsewhere. I'd like to hear Carl's comment on that.
Okay, so I've addressed this on previous episodes. It's really, the word colonization has two definitions. One is one country exerting its political influence over a foreign land or territory. That did not occur until after the Berlin Conference. The second definition of colony is a settlement of people, a settlement of individuals. And so we've had many such settlements of Europeans, of other groups of Africans, of these separate little settlements along the coast were all called little colonies, little outposts. And at that point in history, land was acquired through treaties and not through mass acquisition at some table at the Berlin Conference. So the hinterland territory belonging to Liberia was not owned, or that was considered Liberian territory, was not owned or under the control of Liberia. The settlement was really just a little slither of land on the coast. And so that was really what the Liberian Commonwealth was. We talked before about rivers and all of that kind of thing, but for the most part, the majority of the area we call Liberia today was autonomous and being controlled by indigenous kingdoms and chiefdoms and clans, depending on the culture that inhabited the area. Southeast, it was clans. In the North and Central Territory, you had actual kingdoms. You had, an actual federation and alliance of kingdoms in the North and Central Territory. So there's not one story of some group of people called natives. We're not Aborigines in Australia or something. We're an advanced human population with many complex different systems and cultures of governance. So the colony of Liberia was not an encroachment upon the majority of the land. And even in between the various settlements, you still had autonomous groups in between there. As he clearly stated, as he traveled to go from one colony to another, he had to pass through areas that were settled. So yeah, it's not the same thing.
Thank you, Carl. Again, we want to kind of redirect this to Joseph Jenkins Roberts so that we don't drift so far, because these episodes and these recordings will be kept for study. So please let's come back to Joseph Jenkins Roberts. Let me bring him Aliyu Samba Kamara. Aliyu, you're live.
Why you gotta get that long speech because you know that Madonna talk?
No. I just want us to do Joseph Jenkins Roberts today. We want to cover the presidents within a reasonable time period.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me just I just called specifically to clarify what I was saying. I think something is being misunderstood. Let me first say the goal that usually it is not my intention to discourage your effort. It takes a lot of work doing these research. I do not disagree with you when I make these statements. I disagree with the author. Remember that. It's not you who wrote these things. And I believe there are some of them that you even disagree with. You know, there are some things you'd be like, well, this is not adding up. And that's the point from which I come. When you, according to the writer, Joseph Jenkins Roberts said that Liberians are church-going people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, King Peter and other people were there when they came to this particular place you prefer to probably as the colony. What were their religion? Were they considered Liberians? The piece of land that the quote-unquote people occupied, were Liberians there? In discussing Liberians in such an open and a general way, could he may have included those people as well? It is not just about Muslim or Christian, like the other caller was alluding to about all that stuff. No, Liberia is not a Christian state. Liberia is not a religious country, period. We know that. The point that I am making here, and she alluded to, Joseph Jenkins Roberts was speaking based on his belief. The fact that he was Christian, the fact that they made themselves believe that they had a colony, all of these things are all based on beliefs. Okay, Joseph Jenkins Roberts was representing Liberia when he spoke. So I just wanted to clarify that. And it's not Joseph Jenkins who wrote that.
Aliyu, before you continue, at that time there was no Liberia, just a colony, so we don't have independence yet.
But listen now, what was the colony? Where was the demarcation of the colony?
Oh, okay.
Okay. So,
who were living on Bourgeois Island before it became a colony? When the writer was writing that, Joseph Jenkins Roberts said this, did he include those who were there, the descendants of King Peter and other people? Were they included? That's what I mean by they do extract. It is a fact. So if I'm a man from a Muslim origin, if I was writing Liberian history, of course, you will see that.
So listen, Aliyu, I hear your question.
All right.
Yeah, listen, let me come in. I don't think you really are understanding what the time period was and what we're talking about. So I want you to pay attention to what I'm about to say. Muslim people did not live in the settlement. Indigenous people who are practicing indigenous religion did not live in the settlement. They were autonomous. They had their own governments, their own countries, okay? At the time that this was a settlement, there was no group of people living within the settlement who were not Christian because it was not allowed. Even when King Peter his entire clan was slaughtered by Gatamba, he and his survivors sought refuge in the settlement. The first thing they had to do was give up their culture and their religion in order to join the settlement of Liberia. So it wasn't yet a country where you could come as you are and be a citizen. This was a Christian colony. This was a Christian settlement. And within the confines of this settlement, where they had their demarcation in their homes and their churches, you were allowed to live among them and farm among them, but you had to adapt their culture, which was normal at that period of time. You were not going to go to a Muslim town, in that time period and not do like everybody else. It wasn't normal, so you're mixing up, I think, a lot of different things, and that's what's causing the confusion. Roberts was not incorrect when he was speaking of Liberians. He was not speaking of autonomous Muslim kings and their subjects or their slaves. When Roberts was talking about Liberians, he was not talking about Poro or Sende people. He was speaking of the people living within the boundary of the Christian settlement under that arrangement.
Let me just ask you, because I know there are other people waiting on the line. Let me just ask you, when people say that Joseph Jenkins Roberts had another side other than what is being portrayed, this guy who was defending Liberia, who was creating safe havens, at the same time he was a governor of a colony that discriminated against people who he met there. How do you then corroborate these two? That he was discriminatory, but at the same time, he was a unifier, and he was a fighter, and he was protecting people.
Because I'm not simple-minded. I understand the time period. Because I understand that to put a 21st century mindset into the 19th century is an outrage. And you will never understand history if you do that. I mean, you just go back 50 years. In, you know, our indigenous setting, women were basically beasts of burden. They were chattel. They were property, you know. And so we're sitting here acting as though we're talking about something that happened 5 years ago. How was the world organized? I mean, you had people, you had people who enslaved and sold people who are so-called natives and indigenous were selling people because you talk about discrimination. They sold human beings into slavery because they weren't Muslim or because they weren't Vi or because they weren't Loma. And you're asking why Joseph Jenkins Roberts and these Christians were not allowing non-Christians to live among them? That was what happened at that time period. This is not something to get emotional about or to act like it was odd or unusual. That is just what it was. And when I study history, I look at things for what they were. I don't try to find victims and villains. I just speak the truth as it happened. Because if we start doing that, then we start to realize that our ancestors were some of the greatest villains of our history. So it's just better to just state the things that happened and explain how the world became organized as it is today. I'm not looking for someone to point the finger at, but because there's nothing that I've seen in my studies of history that absolve anyone of horrific atrocities, especially the people that we try to inaccurately paint as victims today.
Thank you. Evis, let me take my last caller now. Time is fast spent. Evis, go ahead quickly. You have a minute.
Yeah, okay, Mr. John. I wanted to get to Ms. Carl. Just ask you this question instead. What did you hear about Joseph Jenkins Roberts growing up in Liberia? Because I think you're way older than I am. What did you hear about him?
Who?
Growing up?
I didn't hear what he said. Is he asking me a question?
You went to school in Liberia, right? This question is for Mr.
Who?
John.
Oh, for Dennis?
Yeah, I won't have a chance to elaborate. I want to get from you, because maybe the audience who are listening can also comment. What are some of the things they heard about Joseph Jenkins Roberts, you know, growing up? Like, I'm pretty young. You're way older than me. So
he is not way older than you, Elvis. You don't know Dennis' age. How you talk?
Talking to your friends in Liberia. What did you hear about him?
Nothing.
You didn't hear nothing about Joseph Jenkins Roberts. So you didn't know anything about him. Just like he was the first president of Liberia. That's all you heard about him.
I didn't hear about him, what he did when he was going to school, growing up in Liberia. No, I did not.
All right.
You want to share anything? Anything you want to share that you heard?
No, because like Ali just came on this platform and said, we know we that grew up in Liberia. Like I said, Mr. John, I'm sure you have a lot more experience than I do on the history of Liberia and people talking about things. But it's surprising to me that you haven't heard anything about Joseph Jenkins Roberts, whether it be a true or fiction or whatever, but that you haven't heard anything about it.
No, to say I haven't heard anything, I didn't say that, right? You were talking about growing up in Liberia. What I heard about him is from his time of presidency, mainly governor, presidency, those kind of things. But his personal life, growing up, going to school, going to college, whatever he did, I don't know. I never heard anything.
Okay. Yeah, and let me make my last comment before I get off the line. And again, like I said, I respect Ms. Fumbler for all the work that she does on this platform, and I think she's a very, very smart lady. But the statement that she just made, that we can't look at these people, you know, we can't judge them in 2022. We got to look at the time period that they were living in. But in that
That's
same
not,
breath,
oh, hold on, Elvis. Hold on. Elvis, don't misquote me on something I just said.
In that time
Elvis,
frame, there was no
Hold on,
pause.
let him finish.
the Joseph Jenkins Roberts and these other people for the time frame, for the time that they were living. But the people who were quote unquote selling slaves, you don't consider that to be normal because that was an evil thing to do. But when we talk about discrimination and people not being able to practice their religions within the so-called colonies, you got to look at it from that time frame. Or you can't look at the other people from their time frame. You always have great things to say about these people and always criticize the quote-unquote native. Since you said that the native were not homogenous people, I take that. But when we say native, we know who we're talking about, the people that they met there.
Okay, so Elvis, I just want to correct something before you continue.
You always have a negative thing to say about them, but when it comes to these quote-unquote colonizers or these people that came over and established the country, you always have positive things to say about them. You never criticize.
Really?
Never.
So Elvis, I think what you're saying is false. No, listen, no, you need to listen to this. I think what you're saying is absolutely false, and I think you're extremely confused about your own history and and who you are. Because if you weren't confused about who you were, you wouldn't be talking in the terms with the terms you're using. In the first place, what I said is you cannot use 21st century standards to judge the past. I didn't say that there was no right and wrong in the past. The difference is, at the time, religion was an ideology, was a philosophy. This idea of religious tolerance is new in the world. It is a very new thing that everyone should be able to practice their own religion freely. This is really a 20th century phenomenon, not even a 21st, not a 19th century phenomenon. So religious freedom, even when the Muslims came in, they did not practice religious freedom. They did not tolerate idolatry and things that went against the religion. So this is what I'm saying, that these kinds of things were normal. It has never been okay, in any sense of the word, to have slaves, especially chattel slaves. And there have always been abolitionists and people fighting against the murder and sale of human beings. Religion, saying that we are establishing this place for ourselves, and we are Christians, and we want to practice Christianity on a continent where that is rare. And saying, if you come and you want to live among us, you have to live like us. Do you think that our ancestors were sitting in these various Muslim and indigenous towns all over the place, envying the settlement and wanting to live among these Christians? Do you think that they didn't respect their own religions and want to remain separate? If you really study the history, you'll realize that that was the case. And a lot of times they didn't want to go to their schools. They wanted to trade, and that was it. So when I say you're confused, I don't mean that as an insult. What I'm saying to you is your ancestors were not knocking on the gates of the settlement saying, let us in, we want to be like you. And they were saying, no, you can't be like us. It doesn't even, the idea doesn't make any sense. If you're Muslim and you live in a Muslim town, why would you want to give up your religion or even keep your religion and go live among Christians who don't live or believe like you do? Why would you want to do that? Nobody was doing that at that period of time. People wanted to stay along with people who were like themselves. And people who were different from themselves were considered, were literally not considered equal to themselves. So if you're thinking that these people were better than your ancestors, and therefore your ancestors wanted to be either better than your ancestors, and therefore your ancestors were being discriminated against because they weren't being allowed to live among them. I mean, the whole thing doesn't make any sense. As recently as my lifetime, I remember being told that those of my parents' generation who went to school
were no longer being tolerated. They weren't treated the same as the people who went to the traditional schools. When they went to the villages, they were treated differently. They were considered foreign almost. So this idea that they have is because the inferiority complex has been swallowed so much and accepted so much that they think that everything is victimization. They believe that their ancestors were these naked savages begging someone to give them a country. And because they were not given a country, that was discrimination, as if they didn't already exist in an ordered society, an organized society. And the reason I tried to cut him off, Dennis, is because, and I really wish you had not let him continue to spew some of the things he was spewing, is because the whole purpose of this show is to try to help you think of things differently. I'm not trying to change anyone's mind, but presenting facts of things as the way they happened. The concept of a group of a few hundred, in some cases, few thousand, in some cases, settlements along the coast being the pinnacle of civilization for people who had lived a certain way for centuries, that in your mind that they envied these people and wanted to live with them, is absurd. The indigenous people who were absorbed early on were the people who had been emancipated from slavery, meaning recaptured Africans and people liberated from the slave factories along the coast. They had nowhere else to go. And so some of them would be taken into the colony and they would run away because they didn't want to live like that. It was strange and foreign to them.
Right.
I mean, it's just a strange way of looking at history. Like, oh, right. the people said you had to be Christian to live. Why would your ancestors have wanted to live with them?
Right.
There's two ways of incorporation: free will and force.
Yeah.
And so maybe they're arguing that they should have used the force to just, which they didn't have enough manpower to do, maybe subdue everyone. I don't understand what the argument is. It's just strange.
Right. And that's what I try to understand, because that's the teacher in Maine, right? So that we be able to tailor these discussion to help people. So what Evis is saying, and what I'm looking for from Evis and people that have such qualms or such belief is come out with evidence or come out with something. He was asking me, what did you hear? So what I want Evis to do is, hey, call, here is how this thing occurred, even though you said X, but this is what I read.
Right.
Okay, present that and we'll be able to discuss it, but say, well, you are defending these people, referring to the colonists.
Yeah.
And then you are talking bad about these other people. So come out with something. Don't even ask me if there's anything that you have. Please bring it and we will discuss it.
Good point. And
in my hometown, there's a missionary that settled there in the 1940s, I believe. My uncle's wife or his widow just passed away like 2-3 years ago. So there's a mission there established by people from the United States, white people. And so she was sent there to be, to go on the mission. And guess what her mom did? Her mom went to the missionary, went on the mission, and took off her clothes completely, say, unless you give me my daughter to go home, I'm not leaving. I'm saying this to say not everybody agreed to even live on the mission. Not everybody agreed for their kids to be sent to school. So as late as in my lifetime, there were still people refusing to live with the missionaries on campus. So if you have any evidence, if you have anything, even if it is they say, come and say it and we can address that. And that's why I want us to keep this to Joseph Jenkins Roberts, because we want these episodes to be a little shorter so that people can talk about them. I went to school in Liberia and I was not a boss, but always first, second, or third in my class. So I know what the Liberian curriculum looked like at the time I went to school. And anything about these presidents was never taught. We just memorized their names and that was end of story. So I'm trying here for people to get this understanding, get this knowledge, and so that all of us can benefit. At this time, I want us to wind this down before we
absolutely. So what I wanted to say in closing is that the reason we started this series beginning in the 1400s of the Grain Coast and carrying it all the way forward. Now we're doing presidents. Is because if you had watched the previous episodes, the foundational knowledge you would have to be able to comprehend what we're doing now would be established. I did do this chronologically for a reason. There are no two groups of people making up Liberia. This is a misnomer. This is a gross misunderstanding of history. We don't have two groups of people in Liberia called Native and Congo. That is an absurd and terrible misunderstanding of our history. We have multiple groups of people that came together to create this republic from different cultures that often clashed. We have a diverse and divergent group of indigenous cultures, including the people in the Southeast who are culturally similar, the Kru ethnic groups that are culturally similar, which include Bassa, Grebo, and so forth, Kran. And then you have the Mendi speaking groups, which include Vi, Mandingo, Pella, and so on. And you also have a huge number of people who came from the Congo Basin, who were implanted, imported, and rescued and came into the settlement. And then you also have, of course, and the least of them was the least numerically of them was the repatriated African Americans. We have to look at the history of all of these people as being African people who came together. It is a fact, an indisputable fact, that the concept of a westernized state was introduced through repatriated African Americans. This is a fact. We have to also acknowledge that when they settled, it was mostly missionaries, and the Commonwealth itself was established as a Christian outpost. And one of their missions as a Christian outpost was to maintain and also spread Christianity. This is a fact. Were there Muslims outnumbering Christians, in the vicinity? There were many Muslims and many different ethnic groups that practiced Islam, but the greatest number of people in the vicinity were indigenous people practicing indigenous spiritualities. And even those recaptured Africans who came from Congo Basin and Niger Delta area and all those places, even they brought religious practices and beliefs that were different from the indigenous Liberians, different from the Muslims, and different from the Christians. All of these.
Thank you, Carl. I want us to conclude on Joseph Jenkins Roberts and set the stage for the next
one. So the reason I wanted to settle all of that is just to put those things into perspective. It's really difficult to talk about the presidents when people don't have that greater context. So Roberts, as a governor, his greatest achievement, in my opinion, was to at last, finally and forcibly put an end to the actual exportation of human capital from the coast. Forcible exploitation through, the transatlantic slave trade. Next episode, we're going to talk more about his presidency. We are going to talk about some controversy surrounding his presidency, his first and second presidency. We're going to also talk about some accusations that were made against him by the French and others, and some boundary disputes. So it's going to be interesting. This is where we're going to get into the political life of Joseph Jenkins Roberts and how he helped to shape the future of the Republic of Liberia.
I can't wait. Tomorrow, join me. I'm going to be hosting Hassan Gassim Jallo. He's talking about the discrimination faced by members of the Fulani community in Liberia today, not 1807, but today. So the case of Hassan Jallo is making the case for the Fulani community and what he has experienced that he termed as discrimination against the Fulani. Hassan is born in Liberia to Ghanaian parents at the time, and he has a story to tell. Join me tomorrow at 12 noon for a sit down with Hassan Jallo. Also, on Tuesday, 7 p.m., the Liberia Medical Mission will be my guest right here and focus on Liberia. Every year, they have a mission to Liberia to help Liberians free of charge. And so they're going to be here Tuesday night to have a discussion. They are launching their new drive as they go to Liberia. They got some, people that volunteer, top people. Also, on Wednesday at 7 p.m., I'm going to be hosting the political leader of the People Liberation Party, PLP, Dr. Daniel E. Cassell. We're going to talk about his recent May West tour. We're going to talk about his political vision for Liberia. And we're going to also talk about what he's been up lately concerning his legal battles right here in the United States. You don't want to miss it as he sits with me Wednesday, 7 p.m. Carl, I have a news that I want to share. This afternoon, we hosted students from the University of Liberia, PROSA, as a political party, and we kept them but someone who was watching the show, watched them, we interviewed 2 hours, and he donated $100, say this is for the students, for them to pay their way to go home. We at Focus on Liberia, we always get people like that. They're very kind.
That was very nice.
Supportive of the things that we do here. We want to thank them so much. And people that also support the History Channel with your question, with your comments, even though we don't get money yet, but if you can support, we want to extend this to Liberia and even have a resource center where people will go and learn Liberian history. This is all in the pipeline, and we're counting on your support. Carl, in 30 seconds, your closing.
My closing is that we have a lot to learn and unlearn, and we must always have an open mind and listen to understand, and not to reflect or deflect. It's very difficult to change your thought or even grow your thinking process. It's only possible to do so if you suspend your emotions temporarily, listen to all of the evidence, and discern for yourself. History is a beautiful subject, and it is one of the most important subjects in uniting our country. If we don't understand how the world got to be organized the way it is, we will be confused about how to move forward. Thank you so much for continuing to watch us, and I will see you all on Saturday.
On that note, we end with our song that says, we are all Liberians. Whether you are repatriated, you are indigenous, whether you came by boat to Liberia, you walk on foot, you came by ship, we are all Liberians, and we love it that way. That's our song that says, we are all Liberians. Have a good night.
We are Liberians. Liberia is our home.